Okay, it is 2 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you all so much again for joining. Wanted to introduce myself really quickly, and I'll fire up the video really short for that. My name is Ryan Carter. I'm the Director of Sales and Business Development here at Protect My Ministry. I've been here for 12 and a half years, started in 2007. So I've been with the company, started as a sales representative and have been slowly just growing with the company. When I first started, there were 7 of us and roughly 1,000 churches that we served. Now we are getting close to the 40,000 church mark and roughly 90 full-time employees based here in beautiful, sunny Tampa, Florida. And I am very excited to be here with you all. I've got 4 children. They range in age. My oldest will be 9 next month, and my youngest is 9 months. So this hits home a lot to me. It's a very personal thing that I know that when I first started going to my church, I was very careful to ask, hey, what kind of procedures do you have in place at the church to keep kids safe, and how do you do that? And so for me, it's more than a cerebral exercise. It's more than just a profession. It actually does mean something to me on a very serious level. So I'm excited to be here with all of you. So having had that introduction, I'm going to stop the video. So no point looking at my face, and we'll talk about other important things. So today we want to talk specifically about how to ensure you're ordering the correct background check for your church. As some of you may or may not know, there are a lot of different ways to do a background check. There are tons of ways, tons of packages that are out there, services, providers, things like that. So how do you know that what you're doing is the right background check? How do you know that you're doing everything your church needs to be doing to keep your kids safe as it relates to child protection? So I want to start with a poll. We have a couple of main options that some of our churches use, the basic, the plus, and then maybe another package that you may or may not be using. So which package does your church currently use right now when you're ordering your background checks? A basic package, plus package, or neither of those 2 options? So I just want to take a real quick poll, see what everyone thinks. And we're getting up there, 28, 29, we're getting some votes. I like it. Thank you all so much. I feel like a teacher, some crowd and class participation. Make it interactive. Hopefully you're not back there like, this is annoying. And we're going to go ahead and end the poll now. We've got 34. That's good. So we've got, the results are 47% basic, 47% plus, and 9% other. So right down the middle on which package some of you all are using. So I want to talk a little bit later about which one is right for you. Sometimes it's basic, sometimes it's plus. As is the case for so many things in background checks, the answer is it depends. So let's talk now about, let's just get this thing going. So next slide. So one of the things that's really encouraging as we've done some research over the last year is churches are more engaged than we've ever seen in having their background checks done. So we know when I first started 10 years ago, 12 years ago, there was a lot of we don't do that, or we know everybody, and churches, kind of a good news, bad news thing. As our culture has changed and the times in which we live are what they are, churches are much more aware of the need for background checks. Obviously, you all are, you're with us. So that's a great thing that we've seen in our industry. It's not enough, though, given what our communities are facing. So we have seen an increase of 12%. Comparing 2019 to 2018, we have seen more and more coming from different churches. That's not just because we've added more churches. It's really a matter of our churches are being more consistent in ordering background checks. And we believe it's not just because they want to do them on employees, but understanding the need to do employees as well as in the volunteers. Unfortunately, one of the things that we've seen, which is not as good, is 4 out of every 10 churches are not running the correct background check. And we'll get into what that is shortly. 90% of churches are not rescreening their staff and volunteers annually. And I'd be willing to bet that since that number is 90%, a lot of us are in that same bucket. And that's what we've found is if they're not rescreening annually, if churches are not doing this every year, most churches are not falling outside of 2 to 3 years. And that's okay. That's kind of industry standard, if you will, for churches. As long as you're not going beyond 3 years, we find churches sometimes doing it every 5 years or never. That becomes a bit problematic when it comes to rescreening your staff and volunteers. So one of the first myths that I want to address as far as how to do this is that all background checks are created equal. And that is simply not the case. There are not just different companies that are out there, but different ways to do background checks. So I want to talk about some of the key things that you can be aware of on that front. So one thing to know, the National Sex Offender Registry is frequently checked as part of the background screening. So that is important to run. It is also important to know that the National Sex Offender Registry does not have every single sex offender out there. There are 3 levels of sex offense, level 1, 2, and 3. They got real creative with the naming. Most states only require level 2 and 3, or they only report level 2 and 3. So you could have a more minor offense, exposing yourself in some situations, public indecency, things like that could be considered a level 1 offense that does not require an offender to actually register. And that could be a problem if you are not seeing that type of information on the reports. The other problem that you'll run into is that not all registry and databases are updated in real time. The best real-time source comes directly from counties, and that does require a deeper background search than just your basic check. And so what that means is most sources update every 30, 60, or 90 days. And so if you are going, let's say if somebody was arrested 30, 60 days ago, but that source has not updated within that time frame, there's a chance that it might come back as no record when in fact there may be a pending case. So that's one of the weaknesses of a database-only search as opposed to adding a local county or a local statewide search. So a couple other key facts to be aware of. Aliases that are tied to social security numbers are a critical must-have. And what that means really is we use the social security number not when it comes to criminal record searching, because the reality is social security numbers, they are not public data, meaning if they're not listed on criminal records. So you can't search a criminal record by first name, last name, date of birth, and social. That doesn't work. What the social does give us is not just the name they provide you as the church, but also any other name that may be tied to that social security number. So if you have a married woman and you only search her married name and she had committed a crime under her maiden name, most other companies will not find that, and they will not provide any criminal records on that name because they were never given it. One of the nice things about Protect My Ministry is we have what's called a smart name search, which means when we run that background check, we're going to take that social, we're going to find every name that's attached to it as far as every last name, and we're going to run all of those through our database as well. So you get an extra search, an extra level of searching that you don't actually have to pay for, which is nice. The other thing to know, the quality of the data varies greatly state by state. So there is no national mandate that requires states to report all of their criminal information to any one criminal database. There is no one database that has all criminal records in it. That just simply does not exist. So the database that we use and every other company out there uses, it really depends on how much information the states are giving to it, and that's what determines whether or not the data is good. And so I want to show just really quickly while I'm on this subject. Let's see, I think I can share the screen. I'm assuming sharing. That hopefully you all can see this map. No, if not. Let's see. So on this map, we have this is our national criminal recommendations. And so what we have here, this is our consultation. We tell everybody, based on what state the person's coming from, what type of background check you should be doing. Hopefully you've had this conversation early on with your representative, with somebody from our company to let you know, hey, maybe the basic is right for you. So you can tell if you're in North Carolina or Texas, Alaska, Minnesota, the basic package is actually what we recommend for those states. And that's because the quality of the data in that state is actually really, really good. So we're getting felonies, we're getting misdemeanors, convictions, more often than not, we're getting non-convictions as well. So it's really good quality data. On the other side, if you are in one of these green or yellow states, we recommend a plus package. That's our next level up, and that's when we're going to add a county or a statewide court search. And you can see in Georgia, just as an example, a statewide package is recommended. Now, we've added another layer on here where we're telling people these little exclamation points. What those mean is if you do a database-only search in a state with one of these exclamation points, we put it on here, a plus statewide package is strongly recommended. The reason why is because we have very, very little criminal data coming from those states. So if you are doing a basic check, which is a database-only check, and you have somebody coming from one of these states with an exclamation point, or you are in one of these states with an exclamation point, you are absolutely at risk of missing a record eventually. So one of the things that our background check does cover, it is a full 50-state sex offender search. However, if you are in one of these states with an exclamation point, beyond that sex offender list, there is very little data that you're going to find. So please, please, please be aware of that, and just take note when you're running a background check, what type of background check you need to run is going to depend on where you are, as well as where the applicant is coming from. So there's that. Let me continue on here. Here's a good example. We recently had a situation where this particular individual in Sarasota County was a sex offender, a registered sex offender in Alabama, and they moved to Florida. And when they ran a background check on this person, they did not include a national sex offender search. And so they did not show a record when in fact he was a registered sex offender in Alabama. So that is wildly important. Please don't ever do just a statewide search. That's another thing that we want to make sure you're aware of. You need to make sure that you're doing not just a statewide search, but also including a national search. We have a question. I'm from New York State. Why is it red? I'll address this really quickly. There are some states where the answer is it could be a basic or it could be a plus, and it depends on the county. So some states, the county level gives us really, really good information. So if you have an applicant coming from a county where we get great data, then you can do a basic check. If you are in an area where the county does not report, then you need to do a plus check, and you can find that under our resource area. And I will give that back to you in just a second. I will post the link to that criminal database shortly, and everyone can have access to it. So I'll continue on, and then I'll come back and answer some more questions at the end. But I think I may answer some of these along the way. So background checks, this is another thing to know. Background checks are the first step of many. So we're not naive to this fact that 90% of the time when you have a registered sex, or I'm sorry, not a registered, when we have an offense, you have somebody who commits a crime in your church, a lot of times it is their first offense. So there is no previous record to find. So even though background checks are absolutely essential and they're important, they are not the only part of the process. They do need to be the first step of many that you're actually going to do to make sure that you're keeping your church safe. So some of our additional recommendations, we want you to define the protocols and processes designed to indicate which background check is right for you. So that's the first thing, is have a written policy, have some things that are standards that you keep in place that can be passed down from staff member to staff minister as well. So when you have people leave the church, it's really important that whoever comes in behind them doesn't have to start from scratch. It'd be great for them if they have some policies that you've written and documented that can be handed to them, and they don't have to start with nothing. So make sure that your background check includes the in-depth alias. Ours always does, so that's going to be fine. And making sure that you're doing the additional county or statewide searches where the database is limited or non-existent. DC, somebody asked about DC. We recommend adding an extra jurisdiction. It's not technically a state, but there is one extra search type that we can conduct in DC, so we do recommend a plus in the District of Columbia. Some more recommendations. Churches should rescreen all staff and volunteers annually. This is what we call our best practice. This is one of those things where we do have our official company recommendation. We want that to be an official stance from us because it is the absolute best way of keeping your church safe. However, we do understand industry standard where a lot of churches end up landing is 2 to 3 years. That again is going to be an okay level, and that's an okay practice. We recommend annually. Industry standard is 2 to 3 years. Please we would highly encourage do not go beyond there. That's just to keep it safe. We already talked about determining your background check. Take a holistic approach to child protection policies. So this was, again, talking about how a lot of those sex offenses are first-time offenders. And so one of the things we recommend is child safety training. That helps everyone be aware. It's sexual abuse prevention training. We offer it, and then a lot of churches do it in-house, and that's great. We highly recommend anything that you can do to communicate to the volunteers that work in your church. These are the things that you need to be on the lookout for. Here are the common grooming patterns of an abuser. Here are the things that a predator is looking to do. I had a great discussion with another contact and a good friend of mine a couple days earlier, where he pointed out that the predators that are looking to get involved in churches, they are not the Marv and Harry from Home Alone. They're not the ones who are getting duped by 8-year-old Kevin. Like, they're not fools. They are actually very intelligent human beings more often than not. They have a systematic approach to gaining entry into the church. They're usually very patient. And so some of the common things that churches will do is the no adults alone rule. You want to have a waiting period as part of before you're allowed to work with kids. We want to see you and be involved in your life for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is. You want to have an objective standard on that. And then you want all the volunteers to go through some type of sexual abuse prevention training to make sure that everyone's looking out for the same thing. So here's another great example, an unfortunate example of an instance where somebody abused a child that had no previous record, and there wasn't much for the church to find, and they could do all their due diligence, but unfortunately there's a situation where people still find a way. So we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can. So some of the other things that people run into, and we've seen this, is, well, I do the FBI background check. We're doing that for our teachers. So those things that's nice. When it's required by law, that's perfectly fine. Obviously, you don't have any other choice. One of the things that we've noticed with the FBI database is that it is missing up to 50% of disposition data. So what actually happened? What's the final result of whatever that person's case was? Almost half of the FBI database is actually missing that information. So because of that, most people don't rely on that as a standalone source. So, and this is important to know too, the screening industry, and this includes obviously Protect My Ministry, we are regulated by the Federal Fair Credit Reporting Act, the FCRA. And that has a lot of consumer protection built in. The FBI does not. So it's nice for the consumer. It does kind of give us some limitations and restrictions on what we are allowed by law to give to the church. So I want to talk about that because it is important to know. One of the most common things that we ask, or we get asked, is how far back are we allowed to search, and what kind of information do I need to get from my volunteers, and things like that. Some really, really great questions. So this is good to know, because some people believe that the FCRA, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, only applies for employees, and it does not. Volunteers are absolutely subject to the FCRA, which means that we have to treat them as unpaid employees per the federal law. So that does give us some restrictions. Now, I'll give you some examples. There are laws in place about how far back we are allowed to report criminal information. That is typically, this is how it goes. Sex offenders that are on a registry, we can report back indefinitely. So if they are on any state's sex offender registry, we're allowed by law, and we commonly make a practice of reporting those no matter how old the actual offense is. So that's nice, that's great. That's a nice warm fuzzy. We all feel better about that. The next level would be your felony convictions. So convictions, again, they fall into the same thing. If we find it, we can report it. Doesn't matter how old it is. So if they have some sort of violent crime, if they have a sexually based crime that's a felony and they served time in prison for it, it does not matter how old it is. We are allowed by law to report that. Now, with misdemeanor convictions, we have a company policy of 10 years. If it's older than 10 years, we typically will not report it unless it is violent or sexual in nature. And then misdemeanor and felony non-convictions. So that's non-conviction, I want to make sure I'm clear, does not necessarily mean not guilty. Doesn't mean they didn't do it. It means that they have some sort of plea bargain, or it's adjudication withheld, or null pros. There's a lot of dispositions that result in a non-conviction. We are not allowed by law to report those after 7 years. So we see this happen sometimes where a volunteer will disclose to a church, and say, hey, I had this happen in my past. I was in college. I had this situation come up. It's a drug charge or it's an alcohol-related thing. And then we don't report it back, and that can create some uneasiness or some angst. Well, if it's older than 7 years and it's a non-conviction, as most of those tend to be, we're not going to be allowed by law to report it. So more often than not, we do find it. We see it pop up on our data, but then we actually remove it from the report, and we have to issue a no record found, and that's per federal law. That is for your protection as well as ours. If we issue a report with information that is not reportable and you take action on it, you can be held liable, and so can we. So we don't want to open anybody up to class action lawsuits or litigation or any types of problems along those lines. So that's an important thing. Another thing the FCRA is going to govern is the adverse action process. So if, based on a record, you decide not to allow a volunteer, there are some steps that you need to take. The first is a pre-adverse action process. So before you just tell them, sorry, good luck out there, you need to do this process here. So the first part is giving them a copy of the report, allow them a reasonable amount of time to review it. That's typically a week or two. Instruct the consumer on how they can dispute the report. That's putting them in touch with us as your provider. And then always include a summary of rights so they know what are your rights. That then gives them a proper amount of time to dispute the record and take it back to us. So that's another key part. So what are the next steps from here? So what do we do? If you are in a state where we recommend the plus and you're actively choosing to run a basic, that is completely your choice. We are not going to force you to do a higher level package. Well, you have to determine what is your risk tolerance. What I will tell you is it's not a matter of if, it is a matter of when you miss the record. Eventually something is going to get missed, and I want to be very clear that we want to do everything we can beforehand to not allow that to happen, and using the right package is one of those tools to help make that work. So know how your state reports criminal records data. I'm going to put in this note here. Let me see if I can't find it. Actually, let's see if I can. I'm going to open up another window and copy this link into chat bar here. So this is a link to our online recommendations. Please double check your state, double check your notes. One of the things that's nice to look at, I'll pull this over here again just so everyone can see it. These resources, this is a helpful place to look. If you determine that you are in a state that you need to be doing a plus package, make sure you're checking this list here for the county and statewide court fees. What happens when we have to run a court search is there are times and instances where we are charged an additional fee to access those records. So before we send you a bill, we want to let you know about those. That will typically show up actually on your ordering screen. We've pre-populated our system with all the county and statewide court fees, so you should be able to see those before you place the order. However, in the event that that's not working, or if you're on an integration where that may not be the case, refer to this county and statewide court fee list for your information. And if you're ever in the mood for some light reading, this national list here, this shows every single data source that we have. And we update this every 30 days. So if you're curious, where does all this information come from? How much information is actually in your database? And you're also in the mood for some delightful reading, this is every single source that we have. So you can see the most wanted list, your arrests, your warrants, your superior courts. Like I said, lots and lots of fun. So that is that part of it. Pull this back up here. And let us help you. If you have any other questions about what kind of package should I be running? How should I do this? What needs to be set up on my account? What are some things I can do to keep my church safe? We would love to help you. We want to answer those questions. And along those lines, let me see if there's anything else. Here's a Q&A. If someone has moved from a state like Tennessee and just got a North Carolina address, should we do what is recommended in Tennessee plus versus a basic? That's a great question. Yes, we recommend determining the background check package on where that person is coming from, not necessarily your location. So you want to know where this person has come from, and that's going to determine what kind of package you should run, not necessarily if you are located in North Carolina or you're located in Texas. So great question for that. Noreen, we always use a plus. What happens if a person volunteer has recently relocated? Do I add the previous address, state, or county? Yes. Great, Noreen. Again, I think the answer is the same there. What determines the jurisdiction is not where you are located, it's their most recent address. If you don't already have this on your application, I highly recommend adding it. You can have either a full, I think our standard is the last 3 addresses, and you can double check those before ordering. Or you want to ask a question like, where have you lived the longest in the past 7 years? So if you don't want a full address history and you want to ask one question that will typically cover it, you can ask the question, where is your longest address of residence in the past 7 years? And that will give you the best chance of finding the jurisdiction that you should be searching for. So I missed step 4 of adverse action. Let's see. Always include a copy of the summary of rights. Thanks, Jim. Always include a copy of the summary of rights. Can you explain how a county search works? What if an applicant has lived in several counties, perhaps across multiple states, also in Nevada? Do I run a county or statewide or just a county? Let's see. Let me answer a couple of those. That's like 5 questions in one. Let me see if I can rapid fire this. County search works by, instead of us using a database, we go directly to that county of residence and we search their main criminal repository. So more often than not, it is a clerk of courts, a superior court, something like that, a justice of the court, something along those lines. We will access that county for their criminal records. That happens either electronically. We pay a lot of subscriptions to have monthly access to some of those county records electronically. If that's not the case, we will send in a physical court runner. That happens a lot in some more rural counties that we work in where we don't actually have electronic access. We have to send in a court runner. That happens in Michigan, Missouri, Mississippi. We have that. So there's a handful of states and jurisdictions where we actually have to send in a physical courier to go. Now, if they've lived in multiple counties across multiple states, that's where it gets a little bit more complex. And if you want to start digging into all of that, I'd like to have a separate conversation. Most people in the past 7 years have lived in 2.5 counties. That's what we found on average to be the case. So across all of our data and what we've seen working with churches and volunteers is over the last 7-year history, which is really the main scope that you're looking in, because remember, beyond that, we're not going to be allowed to report much. That's the main focus, is typically 2.5 counties. We can create packages for you that will dig deeper, and it just depends, again, on determining your risk tolerance. We can create some things that go really, really deep. It's just the more you start adding, the more expensive the background checks become because you're digging a lot deeper and getting more comprehensive. So we can do that for you, and we'll help you kind of customize a package that meets your needs depending on how much you're looking for. For youth that have been in our church, reached their 18th birthday, can a background check be delayed? They come back, no record at 18. Interesting question. I've never had that one. Some churches will, as far as screening minors, I'm glad you asked that question, Leslie, because it's a great point. Screening minors, there are 2 main schools of thought, and I can honestly make a case for either one. The first school of thought is if you work with kids, you get screened, period, regardless of age. That's just a blanket thing we're going to do at our church regardless. Now, in most states, juvenile records are sealed. There are exceptions to that. Washington is one of them. Texas reports some. So there are instances where we have seen and we do find juvenile records. The other case where you may find a juvenile record is if they commit a crime and are tried as an adult. So there isn't the blanket statement that all records are sealed until they're 18 is not completely true. That is the case the vast majority of the time, but there are cases where there are exceptions to that rule. Now, that's school of thought number 1. If you work with kids, you get screened. That's how we're going to do it. The other school of thought is we are going to screen at 18 because the odds of finding anything earlier than that are very, 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 very slim, and it's not worth the extra cost to us as a ministry when we're 99% of the time not going to find anything. That is another school of thought. If that's the direction your church wants to take, it's perfectly reasonable. We don't really have a hard line that we pick and back as a company. You will need to decide that as a ministry organization. Again, what is your risk tolerance? And sometimes it's easier just to say, we're going to screen everybody. Now, I will say this, screening anyone younger than 16 14, 15, 16 becomes pretty, I don't know if that would be worth anyone's time. So just be careful on that one. All right, let me do this. Everyone needs some Tom Hanks in their life. So thank you all so much for coming. I want to give a couple more quick things. Child safety rescreening. Most churches will retrain their volunteers in the area of sexual abuse prevention every 2 to 3 years. So if you are retraining, we recommend every 2 to 3 years. That's perfectly fine. And then you can go from there. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns, we would love to address. Let me see if there's anything else. A couple people raised their hands. Let's see, report price based on volume. It's hard to add the county, top of 1095. We do have packages. We do have discounts available. You will want to consult your sales rep on that. So if you want to adjust your package or you want to add anything to it, the best way to handle that will be to contact your sales rep, and we can figure out a way to make that a little bit more affordable for you if at all possible. Does PMM recommended type? Yes, it does. We do recommend a background check type depending on state. That was addressed a little bit earlier. Just so everyone knows, this is going to be something that we have recorded, and we will send an email out with this recording to all the attendees and all registered attendees. So even if you were not able to make it and you're just viewing this now because it's recorded, thank you so much. So, all right. Well, I am going to wrap it up. If you have any other questions, sales@protectmyministry. Also, my email address is rcarter@protectmyministry.com. That's rcarter, C-A-R-T-E-R, @protectmyministry. And I would be happy to help you out. And thank you all so much for being here. I hope this has been beneficial for you. And we hope you have a wonderful day.